94 years old, and today I'm going to tell you something that may sound dangerous. Don't trust anyone who only tells you to save money. My name is Martin Wilson, and I spent almost an entire lifetime obeying that advice as if it were a sacred law. I saved coins, refused trips, postponed conversations, swallowed my desires, and called all of it responsibility. But there is a huge difference between protecting the future and using the future as an excuse to never live in the present. I only understood that difference far too late. I'm not telling you to waste what you have. I'm telling you to be careful with anyone who turns fear into virtue and calls it wisdom, because the problem was never the money. It was the man I became while trying to protect it. Stay with me, because what took me 94 years to understand may still reach you in time. There is a lie that many men of my generation learned far too early. If you save enough money, one day you will finally feel safe. I believed that when I was young, when my hands were still steady and my back could carry any weight, I worked too many hours, accepted too much silence, and told myself it was all necessary, because a prudent man does not think about pleasure, he thinks about protection. The problem is that protection, when it is born from fear, never feels like enough. You save 100 and think it is too little. You save 1,000 and start fearing you might lose it. You buy a house and begin living scared of every crack in the wall, every unexpected bill, every request from the family. The money that was supposed to open doors starts locking you inside. And the worst part is that everyone around you still calls it good judgment. I did not learn this lesson from books. I learned it at a kitchen table, watching my wife Margaret fold an old travel brochure she had kept for years. She did not yell at me. She did not accuse me of anything. She simply said, with a calmness that hurt more than anger, "Martin, I don't want to die rich in a house where all we ever learned to do was wait." That day, I still did not understand everything. I still thought she was being too emotional, that I was doing the right thing, that the future would prove me right. But today I know, money only protects you when it serves your life. When your life serves money, it has already become your owner. Let me show you how that prison began without me even noticing. I was in my early 20s when I first heard that advice from a man named Thomas Miller, a neighbor who seemed to know everything about life. He would sit on the porch with worn-out boots and a cup of black coffee in his hand, saying that the world only respected people who had money saved. "Martin," he would say, "never spend on anything that doesn't come back to your pocket." At the time, that sounded like wisdom. I had just married Margaret. We lived in a small house, and every dollar felt too important to slip through my fingers, so I started measuring everything. A dinner out became waste. A weekend on the road became irresponsibility. A simple gift became a threat to the future I was trying to build. When our son David was born, I promised myself he would never go without. Then Susan came along, and that promise became even heavier. I worked in the warehouse of a factory in Ohio, left before the sun came up, and came home when the house was already half asleep. Margaret would leave my plate covered on the stove, and I would say I was too tired to talk. For many years I thought that was love. I thought my absence was just the price of security. But today, when I look back, I see the truth with cruel clarity. I wasn't just saving money. I was spending my presence, my youth, and my family in invisible installments. That was when I realized. That was when I began to realize that I had confused sacrifice with love and fear with responsibility. Margaret never asked for a luxurious life, never asked me for jewelry, new cars, or expensive restaurants. What she asked for was smaller, and that is exactly why it took me too long to see it. She wanted an unhurried afternoon, a short trip to Lake Erie, a conversation on the porch without me looking at the clock as if resting were a crime. I remember one night when she placed a yellowed envelope on the table with 2 old tickets inside that we had never used. They were for a small trip she had planned in secret years earlier, when David and Susan were still young. I said it was not the right time, that we needed to save, that there would be time later. Margaret ran her fingers over the paper and replied, "Martin, you talk about later as if God had signed a contract with you." That irritated me, because truth often irritates us when it arrives before our humility. I still saw myself as the right kind of man, the provider, the husband who was doing what needed to be done. But Margaret already saw what I did not want to admit. Our house was becoming safe on the outside and empty on the inside. We had bills paid, food in the pantry, a solid roof, but I was absent from almost every memory that should have included me. Today I understand that not every sacrifice is love. Sometimes it is just fear, dressed as responsibility. The money I saved was not the problem. The problem was letting it decide when I could smile, rest, embrace, and say yes. Because when you postpone life too much in the name of security, a day comes when the security remains. But life has already walked out the door. So what you should do is ask your money what kind of life it is protecting. It took me 94 years to understand that, but today I would tell anyone, save money to have freedom, not to prove fear. Freedom is being able to say no when someone tries to buy your peace, being able to choose where to live, being able to rest without feeling like you are betraying the future. The second thing money should protect is your dignity. Dignity is not having a full bank account to show other people. It is not having to humiliate yourself for a bed, for medicine, or for a basic decision about your own life. I have seen men who saved their entire lives and still reached old age without the courage to spend a single dollar on comfort, because they had already gotten used to living as if they deserved nothing. The third thing is time. And that was the part that cost me the most. I turned down a short trip with Margaret because I thought $50 would be missed. I lost an afternoon of fishing with David because I accepted overtime I cannot even remember the pay for. I told Susan we would talk later so many times that later became the language of our home. And some laters never come back to ask permission. So before obeying any advice about saving money, ask one simple question. Is this buying peace or only feeding my fear? Because if your money does not protect your freedom, your dignity, and your time, maybe it is only building a cage with clean walls and organized bills. And believe me, a cage is still a cage, even when everyone calls it security. The first question I should have asked myself much sooner is, what am I postponing in the name of security? Because there is a difference between waiting for the right moment and using the future as a hiding place. I postponed one trip, then another, then a dinner, then a difficult conversation, then an apology. and each postponement seemed small on its own, until they all came together and became a life I did not have the courage to look at directly. The second question is even harder. Who is paying the price for my prudence? In my case, Margaret paid with loneliness inside her own marriage. David paid with the distance of a father who was always too busy to be remembered with tenderness.
Susan paid by learning not to insist, because every time she came close, I was tired, worried, or calculating some bill that seemed more urgent than her voice.
The third question is the one that hurts the most at 94 years old. Is this money giving me choices, or is it taking away my courage? Because I had enough money to say yes to some important things, but my fear always found a reason to say no. I called it discipline, but many times it was just well-dressed cowardice, sitting at the table with me pretending to be wisdom. Today, when I look at the empty chair where Margaret used to sit, I understand that money saved without purpose can become a silent witness to everything you did not live. The money you never used to protect what you love may end up serving only as proof that you were afraid, and perhaps the most dangerous trap comes precisely from the people who teach you to save, but never ask what life you are trying to save. The trap is that many people say save money as if that were the answer to everything, but almost no one asks if you still know how to talk to your wife, if you still know your children, if you still have the courage to use a little of what you've saved to create a memory that cannot be deposited in a bank. Robert Harris, an old co-worker from the factory, used to repeat that every dollar spent on pleasure was a dollar stolen from old age. He died with organized accounts, drawers full of receipts, and a silent house where his children came in afterward only to decide what would be sold. Back then I felt sorry for him, without realizing I was following the same path. When Margaret got sick, I finally wanted to buy time, comfort, trips, beautiful afternoons, slow coffees, and all the things I had denied. But there are things money pays for too late. I could buy medicine, I could pay for appointments, I could replace the armchair in the living room, but I could not return the years when all she had asked from me was presence. That was when the advice began to feel incomplete to me, almost cruel. Because saving money without learning how to live is like building a bridge to a place where maybe no one is waiting for you. There are things you can buy back. Time with someone who loved you, you cannot. So when I say not to trust anyone who only tells you to save money, I am not telling you to be reckless. I am telling you to be suspicious of any advice that talks about your bank account but says nothing about your life. Save money, yes, but save it with one question attached. What for? To have peace, to have choices, to protect your old age, to avoid depending on other people's urgency. Do not save only because someone frightened taught you to treat every joy as waste. I spent decades believing that security meant accumulating enough so I would never have to worry. But the truth is, I worried my entire life. And when I finally realized I could breathe, Margaret was no longer in her chair. David had already learned to live without waiting for me, and Susan was already telling her problems to other people. The real danger is not saving money. The danger is saving so much fear along with it that when you finally feel safe, you no longer have health, courage, presence, or time. Save money, but do not bury your life along with it. Today, At 94 years old, I do not hate money. I feel sadness for the time I handed over to fear while pretending it was prudence. The mistake was not saving. It was believing that an entire life could be put on hold until everything felt safe enough. If I could go back, I would still work, I would still save, I would still protect my family. But I would have also sat with Margaret on the porch more often, listened to David without rushing, and said yes to Susan when she still came to me for small conversations. Because in the end, people do not remember only what you accumulated. They remember where you were. So answer me honestly. Is your money protecting your life, or is it replacing your courage to live it? If this message touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it before it is too late. Comment below and subscribe to the channel.